Hi everyone. Well, today we're going to talk to Labor's spokesperson for workplace relations and safety, the Honourable Jan Tinetti, who's joining us today on G News, just to talk a bit more about what we've all just witnessed around pay equity in our parliament and the big reaction that's going on right across New Zealand as a result of what I think we mostly all agree is a travesty, a massive insult to working women and their democratic rights, as well as their rights to fair pay. So welcome on board.
Kia ora, Jared. It's really good to be here, but for not such a great purpose, but good being here all the same.
Yeah, thank you. It's really good to have you here. One of the things that did happen earlier this week, Jan, was that a whole bunch of people, maybe over 100 people, showed up at Parliament and expressed their absolute outrage at something the government had just pulled out of the hat with no consultation and no forewarning and no planning. And you then gave a pretty fired up oratory in Parliament about your feelings about this. And just so everybody knows, that video was posted on G News and it had 77,000 views and 277 shares. Such was the feeling that you were able to communicate to everyone, Jan, in your outrage, I think, about everything. So what actually happened there? What was it actually like going through all of that?
Yeah, so on Tuesday morning, it was a Tuesday morning like any other, just coming back after a 3-week recess. We knew that we were going into urgency, but we didn't know why we were going into urgency at that stage. We'd been given a heads up about some of the bills that were going to be in there. We just thought it was because the government needed to get through their agenda for the House. And so there wasn't anything overly controversial at that stage. There were some that we didn't like, of course, but there were some that we did like as well. And so that's just a normal procedure for going into the House. We had our caucus meetings. We don't take devices into caucus meetings, and it wasn't until we came out of caucus meetings straight away we were hit with the news that this had landed at 11 o'clock. The minister had called a complete surprise of a stand-up to make this announcement about pay equity and effectively cutting women's pay, cutting the pay claims, changing the thresholds, making it harder to put through a claim. It really gutted us all. There was just no way to describe that. My office is the closest to the caucus room. Went straight into my office and put my head in my hands because someone who used to be Minister for Women and who had the oversight. This was one of the most upsetting times I think that I have felt when I've heard about legislation coming through, because I know the difference that it makes to women and to people who work in those sectors. So suddenly people started to get very enraged about it, and within about 5 minutes of walking out of that room, I'd had the unions contact me to say that they were coming down to Parliament, that they were going to be staging a protest at 1 o'clock, and that could I see if any of the other MPs would turn up. And most of our MPs suddenly said, yes, we're going to be out there. I think there was well over, it was a few hundred people that were at that and had come and galvanised within a very short space of time. And from talking to people who have been in that place for many, many years, they say that that's very rare, that sort of emotion hits people, that they feel that they need to come. I got to speak on the forecourt then. NZCTU asked me if I would speak and address this alongside the Greens as well, and Chippy made a speech too on the forecourt. And so we just echoed the sentiments that were there about how egregious this piece of legislation was. But not only was the legislation egregious, it was the fact that it was being rushed through. So not only were the government cutting pay and taking money out of women's pockets, they were silencing women's voices and standing up to talk about their feelings towards this legislation. And that's really cynical politics. That's something that possibly we can't use those words in the House because we've got a few words that we're not allowed to say, but I just couldn't see it any other way, is that you start to weigh these things up. And why was it happening? It was happening because they could not make their budget balance. And, once again, women are paying the price. Women are paying the price for tax cuts and tax breaks to landlords and tobacco companies, and it's just so unacceptable. We're sick of it. We've had this for centuries, that we've always been put down, and we're absolutely sick of it. We are a country that has prided ourselves on gender equality, but how much equality is there in that space if we're arguing over the fact that women in female-dominated workplaces are still getting paid less, and it's 2025, than their male counterparts? It's just unacceptable. Anyway, getting on to the speech. We got into Parliament, we had question time, and then this was the first cab off the rank on that urgency agenda. And the first reading, the Minister got up, Honourable Brooke Van Velden got up to make her speech and justified it, where there is no justification. And I had sat there thinking about what I was going to say, but that went completely out the window listening to that speech. I could feel my heckles raising, and I could feel myself getting really, really angry and agitated. And I actually felt what was being said was so disingenuous that it was an absolute insult to women. And that's what I started with. I got up and said that speech was an absolute insult to women. And I still think that. I still think every time I hear a national MP get up and justify it, or write on their socials, or write in an editorial piece in the mainstream media, I just find it so insulting and patronising to women. And for the Minister of Women to say that this is good for women, that is completely wrong and completely unacceptable. And does she know what her job is? To advocate for women? Sorry, I probably will leave it there, Jared. I get really passionate about this because, once again, women are just being expected to roll over and accept the fact that we have a government at the moment that cannot balance a budget and is asking them to pay for it.
I think this is one of those times when your anger is exactly the right response. It's the one that the sane and justified response, a rational response is to this kind of injustice. You actually said in that speech a couple of things. One of them was about the way in which women's democratic rights had actually been completely ripped away here, and also how some of the people out speaking on the forecourt had spent 4 whole years going through all of the comparators and all of the fine detail in the data about making the right comparisons, and somehow or another all of that detail and comprehensive analysis was just being thrown away.
Yeah, that's exactly right. We heard from out on that forecourt on that Tuesday a very nervous speaker, because obviously hadn't been used to public speaking but felt compelled to come up and speak. And that was Tessa, who was a librarian, and she had been part of the team that were putting together the pay equity claims for librarians. They had been working for 4 years, she said in that speech, around working through the comparators, the interviews, the discussions, going through the research, going through all the academic research that supports their claim. And to be told that that was wiped with the, or would be wiped with the swipe of a pen and in the space of a half-hour stand-up, that none of that work would count towards the claims going forward, was completely and utterly wrong. It was just unfathomable that that woman would be put in that space. I've also since spoken to people on the early childhood teachers claim, for example, who had been in exactly the same space. Teachers had put their claim in the day after the changes in the 2020 Act were announced. So they've been going on this claim since 2020, and we're now in 2025. They did say to me earlier today even that it has been moving in the last year at glacial speed, but they never thought that at any stage would this be completely cut. And I've got some ideas about why they were cut for the teachers as well. I don't think there is a pathway back for them. But going back to the democratic rights were completely taken away from women. Their voices were silenced. So this had been put through democratically. There'd been a select committee process back in, well, it started in 2018, this actual amendment to this bill, and it was passed in 2020. And that had gone right through the process, a really rigorous process, probably more so because I was like, strangely enough, I was on the select committee at the time that we went through this. I know how hard and far we went with this particular piece of work. And on the opposite side of the table was Nicola Willis and Erica Stanford, who both thought that this was a pretty good piece of legislation, so were really in support of it. So women talked, we had lots of groups, predominantly women, there were men too, but predominantly women, because this is who it's going to impact the most. Now taking it away, their voices completely silenced. They didn't get the opportunity to speak. So in my contributions, I was trying to reflect those women who had spoken before when we've had select committees in the past, but also those that had, like Tessa, the voices that would be heard in other forums, but we had to get them on the Hansard. It's one of the reasons why we put a whole lot of amendments up with every single one of the 33 claims in those amendments, because we wanted their names being reflected in the Hansard. These are the names of the claims that had been wiped, and that is the reason why we put all of those amendments up for that purpose. And I was very grateful that the Speaker's Office didn't take that as a one, that they took all of those amendments individually, so everybody can see by looking through the Hansard exactly which claims have been cut.
Wow, that's good. It was a great fight back, actually. I think for those that actually did watch what all of the opposition MPs were fighting for, and fighting really well under the circumstances where you don't have much time to pull everything together. One of the aspects that came out with all of the sort of surprise and some of the questions here was you asked Van Velden on, I think it was on Thursday, about the secondary school teachers and how there's about 30,000 secondary school teachers who have a claim in, but their industry is 63% female. So what happens to those 30,000 teachers and their claim? And I don't believe that Van Velden was had any intention of answering that question. She ran a mile. She said something along the lines of, "It's not up to me, it's up to somebody else to do this." I mean, that's the kind of stuff the public is seeing. It's woeful, isn't it?
Oh, it's completely woeful, and I think that, I pretty much know that I'm hitting the nail on the head as to why this came through in the first place, because they had to make their budget work, they had to make it balance, and so this was a way that they could do that. And we know that because David Seymour was the only one who hit the media telling the truth, which must have really infuriated the rest of them when he said around the fact that it was that Van Velden has saved the budget. But you are so right. If people go back and have a look at that question time on Thursday, I asked questions about the secondary school teachers claim, which I also asked in the committee of the whole. But basically they've raised the threshold to 70%. So it's gone from 60% female dominated percentage wise to 70%. Now it seems really weird because 31 of the 33 claims already sit over the 70%. So why would you make that? So, I start to dig around and think about it. And I think it's because of the secondary teachers. So the secondary teachers now sit at 63%. So they're not, if you're just looking at them and ring fencing them alone and not putting them in with the sum total of teachers, if you're just looking at them, then they won't fit that 70%. But what you could think about even further is that if you're looking for comparators within your own sector, the teachers, the primary and ECE teachers, might have to look at the secondary school teachers. And so therefore, the secondary school teachers can't do that claim on their own, but neither can the primary or ECE if they have to use the secondary school teachers as their comparator. Now, that was one of the biggest claims. So teachers are one of the, if not the biggest, when you're talking about around about, with the part-time teachers, etc., you've got over 100,000. I think it's about 90,000 full-time equivalents, but that would have cost us a lot of money as a country, but they've been underpaid for a long time too, particularly some of those ones working in the early childhood area. But now there doesn't seem to be a pathway. Now, there's something else that happened, Jared, that I don't know that many people picked up on, and I'm just going to look at my phone here for a moment, because on either Thursday night or Friday, the Minister for Women put on her socials. Now, comparators have been defined in law, and the threshold has been raised for workforces made up of at least 70% women for 10 years. This is because some workforces, such as teaching, have historically been male-dominated. You tell me when you think teaching's ever been male-dominated.
Not in my lifetime.
No, I have worked in schools for nearly 30 years, and I can count just about on one hand, and I think it is just about on one hand, the number of men I've worked alongside within that near 30 years. Now, I think that, again, there's a little bit of disingenuality, whatever the word is that you want to pick, that's going on here, because they're separating out the secondary teachers. And once upon a time, there were probably more men that were sitting there, but that hasn't been for a long time. But hey, let's change the facts. Why get in the way of a good story with the facts?
Yeah. So if this is about throttling out really big claims, like with a lot of claimants behind them, those other couple that are going to fall below the threshold, isn't there one that's sort of sitting on around about 68%? I think it's corrections.
Yeah.
And
and there's another one in the health sector that's sitting in that mid 60% as well.
Yeah. So this could be, if you're looking at it, just from a numbers point of view, an attempt to just reduce the numbers of people that will be the costs. And so they're talking billions of dollars of savings here. So those that reapply, they might be able to reapply, but they have to go through all of this again. Now, weren't there provisions in the existing legislation that allowed for transitions and the ability to do this in a much more, I suppose, a just manner to those people that have been working already for so long on a claim?
Yeah. There could have been some transitions that were put in place. There could have been something where the work that they have done to date has not been in vain. Actually, I was speaking on the Friday to a good friend of mine who had been, and we just saw each other by chance, but she had worked on the previous support staff claim that had been successful, and of course they were going to be going into review, and now they can't review for a heck of a long time because of the 10-year wait time and downtime that's been put on them. But she said it felt like, now that you can start to see the gender gap start to go out again, she felt like what they'd done was for nothing. Of course it's not, because they'd had a successful claim, but you don't pull the ladder up behind you, which a heck of a lot of women politicians, particularly in Conservative parties, sometimes tend to do, is pull that ladder up behind them.
Yeah, we do see that.
Yeah, so people that have been there, like, I saw Ellie Kingy talking on the news, and she was one of the support staff, and she's a national treasure, that woman. I know her quite well, and she said she did all of that work, and it was really hard, and sometimes it was demoralising, but they did it so that those that came after them, it was going to be easier. And for our daughters and our granddaughters, they wouldn't be having this conversation, because the principle that women need to be paid equal to men professions just should exist. We shouldn't be questioning this, and we shouldn't be changing the rules all the time so that women are more disenfranchised in the whole process. Like, she hit that nail exactly on the head. It's not even a discussion that we should be having. I thought in 2020, when we passed that Amendment Act, we had the only party, and that was a one-person party at the time, was ACT, that voted against it. We shouldn't be having the arguments. This should be something that both sides of the House agree on. But them trying to gaslight us at the moment and say that this is going to be better all around is just so wrong.
I saw today a letter that Nicola Willis has published in Stuff, and also comments from the Prime Minister. And basically they're kind of trying to turn this round on Labour, as if Labour is over dramatizing this and making up stories, kind of basically suggesting scaremongering is going on, that the impacts are a lot smaller than we might all fear. But when it comes to the impacts, the National Party have deliberately concealed what the impacts are. They didn't bother to put a RIS out. I mean, that's obvious. And also, when it comes to the impacts, they won't answer any questions. They hide behind budget sensitivity. They are basically very evasive about all of the questions that everybody has. And I haven't seen any evidence, I don't know if you have, about why you would need to reduce these comparator, the scope of the comparators down to a single industry, or why that actually is something that is thought to be sensible. I haven't seen any studies. Have you seen any studies on why we should be doing that? Because what I did hear was one of your colleagues saying the whole principle of pay equity is that it's across industry, like that you find those comparisons at a data level, about skills and all the factors that go into a job that make a job complex or dangerous or demanding. And you put them into a matrix and you compare all of those aspects, those components of a job, the skills in the job. And what we're seeing in public is more of a debate about the very surface level comparison, in order to kind of like make people go, oh, well, they're quite different roles. But in actual fact, the data underneath it could show quite a similarity in many different ways.
Yeah, you're exactly right. They're using this as a distraction because, of course, that surface level, they don't look exactly the same. But that's not everything at that surface level that makes up what that job is. And that's why the process takes so long. That's why the 4 years, because there has to be a lot of thought and the data level that's put into it, but also the dispositions that people bring to those workplaces. This is a surface level argument that National are using. You might have noticed that their language has changed a little bit too. Like they probably think, well, we're not winning that one. And the Minister of Finance then talked about, oh, well, this wasn't, we didn't realise it was as big. Well, why didn't she realise? Because it was in the jolly budget. As a opposition spokesperson for finance, why didn't she know that? And even if that was true, and she found that out when she first went into office, why did she let tax cuts go through, knowing that it would be at the expense of women? There's a lot of questions to ask here. And why? Why do they still think it's okay? Why do National still think it's okay for women to be paid less than men?
Exactly.
Because that's the big question.
So there's just no solid case for this. We're hearing this spin about how it's more robust and more sustainable, and we're hearing, that it's all workable. But all these kind of words are really not getting down to why they're more workable, why and who are they more workable for, and what is the problem that was really being solved at the data level. I just don't see that National have got a case here. I just see them kind of blustering over the top and relying on rhetoric that's repeated and repeated as they sidestep around the core issues here. And it's an outrage, isn't it? It's just absolute outrage. One person at the Auckland protest said to me, she felt like she had been stabbed through the heart, and that her mother would be turning in her grave if she could see what's going on today to women.
Yeah, and that's felt right across the country. Look, I live in Tauranga, and I went to the Tauranga protest in terrible weather conditions on Friday. And Tauranga is not known for being the bastion of protesting and standing up. It's actually a very safe National seat here. It was afterwards, and we had a brilliant turnout, but it was afterwards that I realised how much this is hitting National space. I walked into shops and every one of them came up to me, the people came up to me to talk to me about it and said how much this is impacting upon women. And I had very, very, very clever, articulate women coming up to me and saying they think we're stupid They absolutely think we're stupid, and this is total gaslighting by them, and we're not going to be fooled, and we're going to fight back. Now, I'd have to say that my heart felt really good after that, because I don't often feel that sense of anger that's going to mobilise people in this city. No, great people here, but I don't often feel that anger like that. But that anger is really hitting through and cutting through, because people were saying to me, well, what can we do to help, and what can we do to support this, to send a message to them that this is just not good enough? Honestly, Jared, this all came from the fact that they grasped and clawed to find a solution to their inadequate fiscal management. They've totally mucked up, and they are desperately, desperately trying to find a way to put that right. And we just have to keep highlighting that, because it is so wrong that women are paying that price.
I 100% agree with you, and I think everybody in the audience does. Well, thank you, Jan. Look, before you go, would you like to say something to everybody that's listening to you now about what happens now, what's going to happen, where Labor stands on this whole thing? Is it going to be repealed? What's going to happen? What happens now?
No, Labor will be repealing this. Labor will be looking for a way forward. And Chippy was really clear about that in the media last week, but also when he stood up out in front of Parliament and said, this is something that one of our areas and values that we strongly believe in, that women need that pay equity and need those pay equity settlements. So we will be putting that right. Why I hesitate a little bit is that maybe we have an opportunity to even make it stronger and better. And so that's some of the work going forward that we're going to be. Now, I can't go too much into detail, but we've got some really big strategies coming up that we're working with unions around how we keep this on the table and move forward to create something that's even better for women. So in the next couple of weeks, there are some protests. There's going to be a big protest in Wellington on Budget Day. They have booked out the forecourt in Parliament, because basically every budget measure at the moment will be at the expense of women, and that needs to be pointed out. So that will be part of that. We are meeting with key leaders this week across a few movements to make sure that we're all connected and all on the same page. There will be more rallies, there will be more protests, but there will also be some action going forward that's going to be positive and constructive. We want as many people involved in that as possible. Sounds a bit airy-fairy at the moment. We're getting it nailed down, and as soon as we can go public on it, we will go public on it.
Well, all power to your elbow. And thank you so much, Jan, for joining us today. And you're welcome to come back again anytime and update us on this outrage.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And keep you informed about what we're going to be doing going
forward. Definitely. Love having you on the show.
Thanks, okay. Love talking to you. Radio, ka kite.
Bye-bye.